They all left because I made them leave. I know. Then tell me why you are still standing in my kitchen. Nicole Durham was 36 years old, 11 months into a country whose road signs she could barely read, and she had taken the one private duty nursing job in Busan that 8 women before her had abandoned inside a week. Nobody would tell her why. Her employer was a 25-year-old man who owned the dance academies that trained half the country's aspiring idols, and he lived on the 23rd floor of a converted soundstage in Haeundae, where the service elevator smelled of floor wax and sea fog and the cold rubber of new-sprung dance flooring, and the woman he was paying her to keep alive had decided, before Nicole ever set her back down on the marble, that no one on this earth could care about her without wanting a piece of what her son had built. What does it cost a woman to stay gentle with someone who is working, patiently and on purpose, at breaking her? She had come from a farmhouse at the end of a dirt road in Decatur, across the street from the barbecue joint her family had run since the 60s, and she knew the difference between a person who was mean and a person who was terrified. She also had a skill she had left off her resume entirely, a thing she learned in a job she no longer discussed. And there would come a night on a wet coastal highway with headlights closing from 3 directions when that skill was the only reason she lived to see morning. If this story got to you, drop a comment and tell me the exact moment you felt him start to change. I love hearing which one you picked. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for staying until the very end. I will see you in the next one. Stay with this one, because an imperious old woman named Brett Peters, ringing a brass bell at 4 a.m. just to see whether the new nurse comes running, is only the beginning. There is a man in this story who reads people the way other men read a room's exits, who can tell you what you are afraid of after watching you pour water, and who is hiding something in his own spine that he has told exactly one doctor and no one else on the planet. There is a weaving workshop in Suncheon Bay with a loom older than anybody's grandmother. There is a confession that nobody forces out of anybody. And I'm telling you now, this story does not end the way you think it will. Before we start, tell me this in the comments. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone had already decided exactly who you were? 14 days before the brass bell rang at 4 a.m, Nicole Durham stood in a freight elevator that smelled of floor wax and hydraulic fluid and read the same 6 words on her phone for the 9th time. The building will not tell you anything. Come anyway. Nicole Durham was 36 years old, 5 feet 7 inches, born at the end of a dirt road in Decatur, Georgia, in a farmhouse with a porch that sagged on the left side because her grandfather had built it drunk and refused to be told. She had been a nurse for 14 years. She had worked a cardiac step-down unit in Atlanta, then a hospice, then a job she did not put on paper. She had been in Korea 11 months. She spoke enough of the language to buy groceries, ask for directions, and apologize, which covered most of a life. To pay the deposit on a 1-room apartment in Jangsan, she had spent her first 4 months delivering fried chicken and coffee on a borrowed scooter, 41 runs on her best night, threading the wet alleys behind the fish market at speeds that would have made her mother cross herself. She did not tell people about the scooter. She did not tell people about the job before that either. The elevator opened on the 23rd floor of a building that had been a soundstage before somebody with money decided a person could live inside one. The ceiling went up 24 feet. There were catwalks still bolted to the concrete overhead, and studio lights hanging dark and dead in their cages, and one long wall of glass with the whole gray shoulder of Haeundae Beach behind it, and the sea beyond that going the color of nickel under fog. The floor was pale wood, and along the far end of it, laid in interlocking panels like a stage inside the apartment, was sprung dance flooring so new it still gave off that cold rubber smell, sharp and clean, like the inside of a tire shop. A woman in a gray suit met her at the elevator and did not offer her hand. "You are the 9th, the woman said. "I'm Miss Han. I run the household. I will not be lying to you at any point. So please do not ask me questions I am not permitted to answer." Understood. Do you want to know what happened to the other 8? I'd like to know how long each of them lasted. Miss Han's eyebrows moved about a quarter of an inch. She took out a phone, scrolled, and read it off like a train schedule. 6 days, 4 days, 9 days, 2 days, 5 days, 3 days, 4 days. And the last one, a woman with 22 years of experience and a certification in geriatric palliative care, had come at 8 in the morning and been gone by 1 in the afternoon, leaving her lunch in the refrigerator. 5 hours, Nicole said. 5 hours and 20 minutes. And nobody will say why. Nobody will say why, Ms. Han agreed. That part is not personal. It is a condition of employment. What Nicole did not say out loud was this. She had already worked out that the money was too much. The posting had listed a monthly figure that was roughly triple what a private duty nurse could command in this city, and money like that is never for the nursing. Money like that is hazard pay, and the hazard is always a person. All right, she said. She followed Miss Han across the pale wood, and that is when she saw him. He was at the far end of the sprung floor with his back to her, in a black t-shirt gone gray at the shoulder blades with sweat, one hand flat on the mirrored wall. There was a speaker on the ground playing nothing. There was a rosin bag by his foot and a rolled towel and a water bottle with the label peeled off. He was 25 years old, which she knew from the paperwork, and he owned 31 dance academies across the country, which she also knew from the paperwork, and half the teenagers in Korea who dreamed at night about a stage had at some point paid his company for the privilege of learning to count music. He was standing very still, not resting, waiting for something to pass. Nicole had spent 14 years reading bodies for a living, and she read that one in about 3 seconds. Weight shifted off the left hip. Hand braced high on the mirror, not low, which meant the pain was lumbar, and he was decompressing it. Breath held at the top, release slow through the mouth. She looked away before he turned around. It seemed like the courteous thing. Miss Durham. His English was unhurried and precise, the vowel shaped by a childhood with an American in it. He crossed the floor and stopped about 3 feet from her, and up close he was younger than the room and older than his face. You drove here. I took the subway. You drove somewhere in the last hour. Your right shoe has a wear pattern on the inside edge of the sole. Scooter, not car. You brake with your heel down. He said this the way another man might comment on the weather. You made a delivery this morning before an interview for a job that pays 4 times what deliveries pay, which tells me you do not assume you are getting the job. I don't assume anything about anything. That is going to be useful. He gestured at a low table by the glass, and Miss Han withdrew without being asked, and he did not sit until Nicole did, which she noticed. There was a carafe of water sweating on a wooden tray. Nicole poured 2 glasses because that was what you did, and she felt him watching her hands the whole time, and she made herself pour steady out of pure stubbornness. 8 nurses, he said. 8. My mother is 74 years old. Congestive heart failure, stage 3 kidney disease, and she has been in this country 37 years, longer than you have been alive. Her name is Brett Peters. She kept her own name because her father had no sons, and she decided the name was hers to carry, and she has never in her life let anyone finish a sentence she had already understood. He turned his glass a half turn on the tray and did not drink from it. She will tell you within the first hour that you are here for my money. She will tell you again in the second hour. She will keep saying it in different ways until one of 2 things happens. And what are the 2 things? You leave, he said, or you prove her wrong. Nobody has ever gotten to the second one. Nicole sat with that. Out past the glass, a fishing boat was working its way east through the fog with its lights on at 11 in the morning. Mr. Sunwoo, she said, can I ask you something plain? Please. Do you want me to prove her wrong, or do you want me to last? He looked at her for what she later decided was about 11 seconds. It is a long time, 11 seconds, when a person is doing it to your face. She has told me since that she could hear the sea through 2 inches of glass and the tick of the water on the tray and nothing else. I want somebody in that room who does not flinch, he said. The rest is hers to give. And then for maybe half a second, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The place a smile would go if he ever let one out. She was hired on the spot at a number she did not negotiate. Nobody would tell her why the other 8 had left, and by the end of the first hour, Nicole understood that nobody needed to. Brett Peters lived at the north end of the 23rd floor behind 2 doors, in a room that had been built as a control booth and still had the cable ports in the wall. It smelled of camphor liniment and methylated spirits and old paper and, underneath all of it, that faint metallic sweetness of a body that is not clearing fluid the way it should. There was a hospital bed she refused to use tilted flat under a good linen coverlet. There was an oxygen concentrator humming in the corner like a refrigerator. There was a brass bell on the nightstand the size of a pear, polished bright on the handle where a hand had worn it. And there was a loom against the far wall. Nicole did not know what it was at first. 4 upright posts of dark wood, a beam across the top, a warp of red silk threads strung tight and going nowhere, dusty. It had been oiled so many times over so many years, the grain had gone the color of molasses. That is not yours to touch, Brett Peters said from the bed. No, ma'am. The old woman was thin the way a hawk is thin. White hair pinned up with an actual pin. Eyes so pale a blue they looked bleached, and a Savannah drawl that 37 years abroad had sanded down without ever removing. She looked Nicole over from the shoes up and took her time about it. How much is he paying you? That's between him and me. It is 3 times market. I checked. I have the number. A dry sound in her throat that was not a laugh. You are the 9th woman to stand there with her hands folded. The 8th one cried in the hallway. Did they tell you that? They told me she stayed 5 hours and 20 minutes. 5 hours and 20 minutes, Brett Peters repeated, and something almost warm came into her voice, the pleasure of an accurate figure. She wanted to say a prayer with me, in my own room, as if I had asked her. Nicole crossed to the concentrator and checked the flow, and checked the tubing for kinks, and checked the water in the humidifier bottle, which was low. She did all of it without hurrying and without asking permission, because permission was a door this woman would enjoy holding shut. You are not listening to me. I'm listening. Your oxygen line has a crimp behind the nightstand. It's been there a while. Nicole knelt, freed it, and heard the hiss come back up to where it belonged. You've been short of breath in the afternoons. Silence from the bed. Who told you that? Nobody told me anything, Mrs. Peters. That's the whole system here. That first day, Brett Peters called her a hired girl, twice. She sent back her lunch on the grounds that the rice was insolent. She waited until Nicole had settled her against the pillows and then asked, in a voice pitched to travel, whether it was true that Americans of Nicole's particular background were naturally suited to fetching and carrying, and she watched Nicole's face while she asked it, watched it with real hunger, the way you watch a match you have just struck. Nicole finished tucking the pillow. Her hands did not change speed. Do you want the blinds up or down? You did not answer me. Up or down, ma'am? Down. A pause. You are going to be tiresome. Probably. What I want you to understand about that afternoon is that Nicole was not being noble. She has been very clear with me about this. She was 36 years old, and she was tired, and she had $900 in a Korean bank account and a scooter that was not hers, and she had grown up across the street from a barbecue joint her family had run since the 60s, which meant she had spent her whole childhood watching her grandmother serve people who did not deserve to be served, watching her grandmother do it with a straight back and a full plate. And she had learned early that there is a difference between being humble and being humiliated, and that the difference lives entirely inside the person doing the work. She also thought the old woman was terrified. She had no proof of it. She filed it with the other things she had no proof of. The loom had a name, it turned out, and the name was the first thing Brett Peters ever gave her for free. It was on the 4th day. Nicole was changing the dressing on a shin ulcer that the 7th nurse had documented as improving, and which was very plainly not improving. And Brett Peters, who had been narrating Nicole's inadequacies for 20 minutes, went quiet and said, "It came from Suncheon Bay. The workshop is my husband's mother's. Was. Hanbok weaving, 5 generations. That loom is older than anybody's grandmother, including mine, and I am the only one left who knows how to dress it. Do you want me to open the blinds so you can see it better? I want you to stop pretending you care. I'm not pretending anything. I asked about the blinds." The old woman's mouth worked. Then, low, almost to herself, "He's going to be alone. When I go, there will be nobody in the world who is not on his payroll." Nicole taped the dressing down and did not look up, because looking up would have ended it. By the 6th day, she had noticed 9 things about the son and written down none of them. He came in at 6 every morning and stood on the sprung floor for 40 minutes, without music. He kept a tin of lidocaine patches in a drawer with dance tape and a stopwatch. He never sat down in front of his mother. He had a way of standing in a doorway with his weight entirely on the right leg while he asked, in the flattest voice imaginable, whether she had eaten. On the 6th evening, he brought Nicole a coffee from the machine and set it down at her elbow. Black, no sugar, which was exactly how she took it, and she had never once made it in front of him. "You've been counting," she said. "You have been steady," he said, and left. She sat there for a minute with the cup warming her palm and the sea going dark out past 2 inches of glass, and she thought, carefully and only once, that this was a very dangerous house to be lonely in. Then, on the 14th night, at 4 a.m, the brass bell rang. Nicole came up out of sleep in the staff room with her heart going hard, and the sound came again, 3 quick strikes, not the tremulous ring of a sick woman needing help, but a clean, deliberate, testing sound. The sound of a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. She looked at the clock. 4:02. And she was already reaching for her shoes when she heard, underneath the bell, something she had not heard from that room in 14 days. The old woman was crying. The bell rang 3 times at 4:02 in the morning, and then it stopped, and the sound that came after it was worse. Nicole went through the first door with her shoes in her hand and through the second one barefoot. The room was dark except for the green pilot light on the oxygen concentrator and the gray wash off the sea coming through the blinds. And the air smelled of camphor and spirits and, new that night, the dusty vegetable smell of old silk that has been disturbed after a long time undisturbed. Brett Peters was on the floor. She was sitting with her back against one of the dark wooden posts of the loom, 74 years old, in a nightgown, 1 slipper on and 1 slipper somewhere else. The cannula had come off her left ear and hung against her collarbone, hissing quietly into nothing. In her right fist she had a handful of red warp threads, and 3 of them had snapped, and the broken ends stuck up out of the beam like whiskers. "Get out," she said. "Let me get your line back on first." I said, "Get out of my room." Nicole knelt on the wood. She did not ask permission, because permission was a door this woman would enjoy holding shut, and she had learned that in the first hour. She hooked the tubing back over one ear and then the other, seated it under the nose, put 2 fingers on the papery wrist, and counted. 118 and irregular. Feet cold, skin dry. No swelling at the temple, no give in the hip, no sound out of her when Nicole pressed along the ribs, which meant she had gone down slow and been on that floor a while. "How long have you been sitting here?" "I do not answer questions from hired girls at 4 a.m. 20 minutes, then." Nicole got an arm behind her and brought her up in one motion onto the ottoman, and the old woman weighed about as much as a folded quilt, and neither of them said anything about that. "You rang the bell 3 times. Loud. That wasn't a call for help. That was you making sure I heard something else." Silence. The concentrator cycled. You will not tell him, Brett Peters said. Tell him what? The old woman looked at the loom, at the red warp with the 3 broken threads in it, at the beam her husband's mother had oiled and her husband's mother's mother before that, 5 generations of hands in Suncheon Bay, and she said it very quietly, in that savannah drawl worn thin by 37 years of another country. That I cannot dress my own loom. Nicole sat back on her heels and let 4 seconds go by without feeling them. That was the first crack. She has told me since that she knew it for what it was, and that she also knew better than to touch it, the way you know not to put your thumb on a blister. All right, Nicole said. All right. The old woman's mouth pulled sideways. You enjoyed that, coming in here and picking me up off the floor like a sack of rice. You will tell the girls at the church about it, wherever you people go. Do you want tea or do you want to lie down? Tea, and you will not put honey in it. The last one put honey in it, like I was a child with a cough. Nicole put no honey in it. She sat in the chair by the door until the woman's breathing evened out at 5:40 in the morning, and at 6 exactly she heard, through 2 closed doors and 90 feet of pale wood, a man walk out onto sprung flooring and stand there in the dark without music. She did not tell him. That is where I want to start the part that got hard, because for the next 9 days, Brett Peters went to work on her with a patience that Nicole eventually came to respect, the way you respect weather. It began with the food. Lunch went back on the grounds that the soup had been salted by an enemy. Dinner went back because Nicole had set the spoon on the right. On the 3rd day, the tray came back with everything eaten, and the old woman told Miss Han, loudly enough to carry down the hall, that the nurse had stood over her and watched her chew. Then it was the bell. 4:02, then 3:15, then 2:50, then twice in one night, and never once for anything. Nicole came every time, checked flow and pulse and skin, and every time she was informed that she had taken too long, that the 8th nurse had been faster, that the 8th nurse at least had the sense to cry where a person could see her. Then the jade pin went missing. It was a hairpin, pale green, older than the loom according to the woman who owned it, and it was gone off the nightstand on a Tuesday. Nicole was in the room from 7 in the morning to 8 at night that day, which the household knew. Miss Han came in her gray suit and stood with her hands folded and said the thing she had promised she would never do, which was to lie. And so she did not lie. I'm required to write an incident report. Write it. Miss Durham, I write it to the agency, and the agency copies your visa sponsor. That is how this works. Miss Han's voice did not change at all, which was, Nicole understood, that woman's entire way of being kind. 2 reports and you are unemployable in this city. 3 and you are on a plane. What Nicole did not say out loud was this. She had $900 in a Korean bank account when she took this job, and she now had $2,400 and a 1-room apartment in Jangsan with a deposit she could not get back before the lease ran, and a borrowed scooter she had already given back to a man who had been kind enough not to ask why she needed it. If the report went in, she had 5 weeks, maybe 6. All right, she said. The pin turned up on Thursday, under the mattress on the far side, exactly where a hand could reach it without leaving the bed. Nobody apologized. The report had already gone in. And on Friday morning, the digoxin count was wrong. 2 tablets short in a bubble pack Nicole had signed for herself, in her own handwriting, at 9:14 the previous evening. She stood in that control booth, with the pack in her palm and the sea going wide out past the blinds, and she felt the floor of her life tilt about 2 degrees, and Brett Peters watched her from the pillows with her pale, bleached eyes and said nothing at all, which was the loudest thing she had ever said. Where are they? I have no idea what you are talking about. 2 tablets of a cardiac glycoside, Mrs. Peters. If you took them, I need to know now because in about 40 minutes you are going to start seeing yellow rings around the lamp. You are hysterical. Nicole called it in. She recorded the count, called the cardiologist line, ordered the labs, wrote everything down at 10:04 in the morning in a hand that did not shake, and put her own name at the bottom of a report that could have ended her. The labs came back clean at 4 in the afternoon. The 2 tablets were found at 6 in the evening in a teacup in the bathroom, dissolved. That was the day Nicole understood she was not being tested anymore. She was being removed. The other thing that happened in those 9 days is that a man came to the 23rd floor with a leather folder. His name was Mr. Ryu, and he was the deputy director of the academies, and he wore a suit the color of wet slate and cologne that arrived in a room 3 seconds before he did. Nicole passed him in the kitchen at 11:20 in the morning while he was waiting on Sunwoo Sa, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of furniture he is thinking of moving. "You are the nurse." "I am." "You see him every day?" He set the folder on the counter and squared it to the edge. "How does he walk in the mornings?" Nicole poured water into a glass and did not drink it. "He walks," she said. "Miss Durham." He smiled. He had a very good smile, and 31 academies worth of teenagers had probably signed contracts under it. "There are people on our board who would be grateful for a straightforward account of his health. From someone with clinical standing, a page and a half. Confidential, obviously." "How grateful?" "You would not deliver food again." There is a version of this story where she thought about it. I'm not going to pretend she did not do the arithmetic, because she did. Standing there with the glass in her hand and 5 weeks of money in the bank, and the arithmetic took her about 2 seconds. "I don't have anything to tell you," she said. "He walks." Mr. Ryu picked up his folder. On his way out, he said pleasantly that Busan was a small city, and the young day aide, who came Tuesdays and Fridays, a girl named Jiwon, who giggled every single time Brett Peters called Nicole the hired girl, held the elevator for him and giggled at that too. Nicole filed both of those away with the other things she had no proof of. Now the part I have been waiting to tell you. On the 18th day, the car was needed at 7 in the morning, and the driver had a fever of 39 degrees, and Miss Han was in Seoul, and Sunwoo Sa needed to be at a school in Gimhae by 8:30 and did not, Nicole noticed, offer to drive himself. "Can you drive?" "Yes." "Then drive." The car was a black sedan, absurdly quiet, worth more than her grandfather's house and everything inside it. Nicole put the seat where she wanted it, which was closer than most people would, set both mirrors to catch the rear quarters instead of her own hands, put her palms at 9 and 3, and checked the mirror sequence twice before she moved 1 inch. Habit. 14 months of training in a job she did not discuss, and 5 years of doing it, and none of it on any resume she had ever handed anybody. He watched her do all of it from the passenger seat, not the back seat. The passenger seat, with his spine pressed flat against the leather and his right hand resting on the door handle. 11 minutes onto the expressway, he said, "Where did you learn to sit like that?" "Delivery." "No." He did not ask again. He let the word sit there between them for 40 kilometers, and Nicole drove, and the fog burned off the water somewhere around Songjeong, and neither of them said one further thing until she pulled into the school and he opened his own door. "You take your coffee black," she said. "No sugar. Same as me. You noticed mine in 6 days. 5. Why?" Sunwoo Sa stood there in the cold with one hand still on the frame of the car, taking the weight off his left hip the way he did in every doorway in his own home, and he looked at her for a long moment with that flat, unhurried face. "Because everybody in my life is on my payroll," he said, "and you are the only one who has never once looked at my back." Then he went inside and taught 60 teenagers to count music for 3 hours, standing the whole time. Nicole had not let herself feel this until she was alone in that quiet car with the engine off. She was in trouble. She knew it because she had memorized how he took his coffee, and she had never once written down a single thing she had noticed about his spine. And a nurse who keeps a secret out of tenderness has stopped being only a nurse. She found the notebook that night. She was looking for a spare humidifier bottle in the bottom of the nightstand, and her hand came out with a black composition notebook, the cheap kind, cover soft as cloth from handling. Inside, in a slanted old-fashioned hand, were columns, names, dates in and dates out, and a third column, narrow, with a word or two in it beside each name. Prayer, honey, perfume, cried Tuesday, weak stomach, 9 rows. The 9th said Durham, and the date she started, and where the last column should have been, there was nothing at all, just a small, hard indentation in the paper where a pen had been pressed and held. Nicole put it back exactly as she found it, squared to the edge, and sat down in the chair by the door and looked at the woman asleep in the bed, with her mouth open and one hand curled around nothing. On the 21st day, Brett Peters demanded, in front of her son and Miss Han and the giggling day aide, that the American be dismissed by Friday for theft, incompetence, and familiarity. Sunwoo Sa listened to all of it. Then he said one word, quietly, the way powerful men say things when they have already finished thinking. No. Then I will go to Suncheon myself and dress that loom with my own 2 hands, and you may explain to your father's family why you let me. Fine, he said. Miss Durham drives. The rain started at 4:10 that afternoon and did not stop. The rain that started at 4:10 that afternoon was still coming down on Thursday morning when Nicole put the black sedan in gear with an oxygen bottle strapped upright in the footwell behind her and a 74-year-old woman in the back seat who had not spoken to her in 38 hours. Suncheon is about 3 hours west of Haeundae, if the weather behaves. The weather did not behave. Brett Peters rode with a wool blanket over her knees and the cannula in and her chin up, watching the wipers. Ji-won sat beside her with a thermos she had not been asked to bring. Sunwoo Sa rode in the passenger seat, spine flat against the leather, right hand on the door handle, and said nothing for the first 90 minutes except to read out an exit number Nicole had already seen. Nicole drove with her hands at 9 and 3 and her mirrors set wide, and somewhere around the second toll plaza she noticed a white van holding station 4 car lengths back through 3 lane changes. She said nothing. She adjusted her speed by 6 kilometers an hour and the van adjusted with her. Then she said quietly, "Mr. Sunwoo, put your seatbelt across your hips, not your stomach. Now, please." He did it without asking why. That is the thing about a man who reads rooms for a living. He heard the change in her voice the way she had heard the crimp in an oxygen line. They came off the expressway onto the coastal road at 10:41 in the morning, wet asphalt, seawall on the right, black water going gray and back to black, and the white van closed to 2 lengths. And a second set of headlights came up out of a side cut on the left with no signal. And 300 feet ahead, a flatbed truck swung broadside across both lanes and stopped, 3 directions. Nicole has told me since that the strange part was how quiet the inside of the car got, that expensive quiet, and how she could smell the wet wool of the blanket and the faint plastic of the oxygen tubing and somebody's cologne on the upholstery from a passenger 3 days gone. She did not brake hard. That is the whole thing, if you ever want to know. Everybody brakes hard. She came off the accelerator, let the weight settle onto the front tires for about 1 second, and put the nose of the sedan at the 8-foot gap between the flatbed's rear wheels and the seawall, which was not a gap you could drive through and was never meant to be. The van committed. The second car committed with it. Both of them turned in to close a hole she had already decided not to use. At 11 feet from the flatbed, she cut the wheel left, dropped the shifter, hauled the handbrake, and brought 2 tons of German sedan around in a flat controlled arc across the painted line. Rear tires screaming on wet paint, water going up off the road in a sheet the height of the roof. The car came out of it facing the way it had come. She released the brake, straightened, and was accelerating east through the space the second car had just vacated before either driver had finished turning his head. She took the first ramp, then a farm road, then a service lane between 2 greenhouses, and she put the car nose out under a dripping awning, engine running, and looked at the mirror for 40 seconds. Nobody came. Nobody in that car made a sound for a while. Then, from the back seat, in a Savannah drawl gone thin as paper, "Where did you learn to do that?" "A job I don't discuss." "I asked you a question, girl." Nicole watched the mirror. "And I answered it." Jiwon was crying without any sound at all, both hands around a thermos she had not opened. Sunwoo Sa reached over, took the phone out of the console cradle, and made one call in Korean that lasted 22 seconds. Then he set the phone down and put his hand flat on the dashboard, and Nicole saw his knuckles go white, and she understood he was not frightened. He was doing arithmetic. They reached Suncheon Bay at 1:20 in the afternoon. The workshop was a low building of gray brick with a tin roof and reeds behind it going flat under the rain, and inside it smelled of raw silk and rice starch and cold ash and the sharp vegetable bite of indigo, and the light came in weak and green through paper windows. 4 looms, 3 of them dressed. 2 women in their 70s stood up when Brett Peters came through the door and bowed to her, and she answered them in Korean so old-fashioned that Jiwon's mouth came open. Then everybody stood back and let her go to the empty loom, and Nicole, who had brought a folding chair in from the car, set it down 3 feet behind her and waited. Brett Peters lifted her right hand to the heddles. It shook. It had been shaking for 9 days, and it had been shaking through the digoxin and the jade pin and the bell at 4:02, and here in front of 5 generations of her husband's family's work, with the red silk hanging ready, it shook so badly she could not have threaded a needle the size of a fence post. She stood there for 26 seconds trying. Then she sat down in the chair Nicole had put behind her, because it was there, and she said, to the loom, and not to any person in the room, "I made them all leave." "I know that, ma'am." "You do not know it. You think you know it." Her hands were in her lap now, one holding the other still. The first one had a boyfriend who asked her what my son's apartment was worth. I heard her tell him on the telephone in my own hallway. The fourth one photographed my medication and sold it to a magazine, and the magazine printed 3 lines about my kidneys. And I have never told him, because he would have gone after them, and it would have cost him more than it cost me. She breathed. The concentrator hummed by her ankle. The 7th wrote that my leg was healing when it was not, because she wanted the contract renewed. I lay there and let her write it, and then I sent her away. "And the pin?" Nicole said. "I put it under the mattress." Nobody in that workshop moved. The rain went on the tin. "And the tablets?" "I dissolved them in the cup, and I put the cup in the bathroom, and I waited to see whether you would write your own name at the bottom of the page." The old woman's chin came up, and her eyes were wet, and she did not wipe them, which Nicole later said was the single most familiar thing she had ever seen her do, because it was exactly what Nicole herself would have done. "You wrote it at 10:04 in your own hand. You could have counted it wrong on purpose and blamed the pharmacy, and I would never have known." "You'd have known." "Yes." A small terrible pause. "I would have known." She looked at her hands then, just looked at them. "He's 25 years old," she said. "He stands on that floor at 6 in the morning where nobody can see him. And he does not tell me why, and I am going to die inside the year. And every single person who will be left in the room with him is being paid to be there. I could not tell the difference between the ones who cared and the ones who were counting. So I decided none of them cared. It is easier to be certain than to be wrong." Nicole crouched down and put 2 fingers on the papery wrist out of pure habit, and counted, and it was 96 and irregular, and she let go. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right," she said. "It cost me an incident report. It nearly cost me the country. I'm aware. But I'm going to dress that loom while you tell me how, and then you're going to sit here and watch it hold." Brett Peters made a sound that was not a laugh and was not a sob, and had been waiting 37 years to get out of her. They were back on the 23rd floor at 9 that night, and Mr. Ryu was there in his wet slate suit, with his leather folder squared to the edge of the counter, and 2 board members with him, and Miss Han in gray by the elevator. Sunwoo Sa did not raise his voice. He never once raced it. 3 vehicles, he said. A white van rented Tuesday at 4:15 in the afternoon on a corporate card ending 8802. A gray sedan rented on the same card 11 minutes later. The flatbed belongs to a contractor who has invoiced our Gimhae property twice this year. Your phone was on the coastal road at 10:38 this morning, 400 meters from the cut, for 14 minutes, and you were not on that road for any reason connected to this company. He turned his water glass a half turn on the tray and did not drink from it. You wanted a page and a half on my spine. When she would not write it, you decided a car accident would say the same thing about my capacity and say it louder. 31 academies. You were 3 signatures away from an emergency vote. Mr. Ryu said, "This is a misunderstanding." It is not. Then Sunwoo turned to Nicole and he said quietly, "The reports on you disappear tonight. All of them. The agency, the sponsor, the file. I can do that in one phone call and nobody will ever ask a question. And here is the part I have been waiting to tell you." Nicole Durham stood in that enormous room with the sea black beyond 2 inches of glass, 36 years old, $2,400 in the bank, and she said, "No. Miss Durham, if you erase them, then for the rest of my life, I'm the nurse who got saved by the man who signs the checks." Her hands stayed at her sides. "I want them answered, on the record. Mrs. Peters writes what she did and signs it, and the agency reads it, and they clear my name because it should never have been dirty. And Mr. Ryu goes to the police with the rental card and the phone log, not to you. That will take months. Then it takes months." Behind her, very small, Ji-won said, "I will write one too. I saw him hold the elevator. I should have written it in March." Brett Peters, in the chair by the glass with the blanket over her knees, picked up a pen. It took 5 months. That is the part nobody puts in a story, the 5 months. The agency letter that came back asking for clarification twice. The statement Brett Peters wrote out in her slanted, old-fashioned hand and signed at the bottom, 4 pages of it, every test she had set and every date she had set it on, including the jade pin and the teacup and the bell at 4:02. Ji-won's statement, 1 page, badly spelled, delivered in person because she did not trust email. The detective in Suncheon, who wanted the ambush, described 3 separate times and asked Nicole to draw the 8-foot gap on a napkin. Mr. Ryu kept his name and most of his life. He was not charged with anything that stuck. He resigned from the board in April for personal reasons and took a consulting position with a company in Daegu. And he's still invited to the same dinners. And at those dinners, people go quiet in a particular way when he sets down his glass. That is what justice looked like. Not annihilation. A permanent small silence following a man into rooms he used to own. Brett Peters lived 9 months and 12 days after Suncheon Bay, which was longer than she had promised and shorter than anybody wanted. She spent a good piece of that autumn in the chair by the glass, with the loom dressed and holding, red silk taut, telling Nicole exactly how wrong her hands were, and then correcting them. And the last column of the 9th row in that black composition notebook was never filled in. Nicole found the notebook again in December, in the bottom of the nightstand, squared to the edge. Durham. The date in. The pen indentation. No word. Nicole has told me she understood that as the kindest thing that woman was capable of writing. Now the part I want to leave you with. It is a Sunday in the following March, and the kitchen on the 23rd floor smells of coffee and wet stone from the balcony door being open, and out past 2 inches of glass, Hyundai is doing what it always does, which is not care. She's 36 years old for another 6 weeks. She's not the nurse anymore. There is no patient in the control booth at the north end, and the room has a loom in it and a chair and nothing else, and she still checks the doorway when she passes it, out of habit, the way you keep reaching for a step that has been taken out. Sunwoo Sa comes in at 6:40 in the morning, off 40 minutes of standing on the sprung floor without music. He is 25 years old. He puts one hand flat on the counter and takes the weight off his left hip, and he does not hide it, and that is the whole distance the two of them traveled. She pours 2 cups, black, no sugar, both. Your left side is worse in the rain. Yes. Did you tell the doctor that? I told you. She sets his cup down at his elbow. She does not say anything about it, because there is nothing to say about it that is bigger than the cup being there. He picks it up with both hands the way he does when his back has been at him, and he looks at her over it, and then, standing in his own kitchen at 6:40 in the morning, with the sea going pale behind him, Sunwoo Sa smiles. Fully, all of it. The guarded face gone entirely, given to one person in one room, and nobody in this country has ever seen it, and nobody ever will. She had learned that dignity is a thing you carry, not a thing you are handed. She had learned that the cruelest person in the room is usually the most frightened, and that this does not excuse a single thing they do, and that you can know both at once and still change a dressing gently. She had learned that being truly seen has almost nothing to do with being looked at, and everything to do with somebody counting how you take your coffee and never once mentioning it. She had learned that she could have let a rich man erase her record with one phone call, and that the reason she is able to stand in this kitchen is that she did not. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me the exact moment you felt Brett Peters start to break. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next one.